Welcome to the deep dive. We're taking that mountain of information you shared with us and really distilling it down to what you need to know about a truly stunning global event.
Yeah, today we're diving into a detailed news transcript. It covers the chaotic final hours of December 31st, 2025.
And it's focused entirely on a massive U.S. military operation in Venezuela.
This is a really critical deep dive.
Yeah.
Our mission here is to perform, a surgical analysis of the source material we have.
So we have to unpack the administration's claims.
Exactly. The claim that this was a legal, targeted action aimed at criminal charges, and then we have to hold that right up against the fact.
The on-the-ground reporting, the international legal view.
And, of course, the huge historical context that just screams oil and regime change.
Because the initial news was, it was just genuinely shocking. The United States has seized Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores.
But the real story really begins with President Trump's statement, which just completely redefined the whole thing.
Right. He didn't talk about law enforcement. He said, and this is a direct quote, "We're going to run the country until such time we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition."
And now Maduro and his wife are expected to face narco-trafficking charges in New York.
Okay, let's unpack this, because before we even get to the legal gymnastics, we have to grasp the sheer force involved here. This was not some quiet precision raid.
No, not at all. The scale of the operation, which is detailed in the sources, it immediately tells you what this really was. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, was very blunt about it.
He reported over 150 of the most advanced military aircraft the U.S. has.
A massive air campaign. And that was coordinated with the CIA and U.S. Delta Force soldiers on the ground.
And the preparation for it was just as extreme.
Oh, absolutely. The general admitted that they engineered a complete, intentional blackout of Caracas.
The entire capital city.
Plunged into darkness just to make it easier for them to operate.
That kind of detail, it shows the massive scale, but it also confirms the massive risk involved.
Well, yeah. Both General Kane and President Trump acknowledged they faced, and their words were a lot of opposition from Venezuelan forces.
So this wasn't a simple extraction?
Not even close. It was a contested, large-scale military invasion, fought on foreign soil against that country's standing army.
Which brings us directly to the crucial legal distinction that the reporters on the ground are making.
Right. The U.S. is framing this as a seizure.
A seizure related to criminal charges. But Andrea Chavez, reporting from Caracas, she drew a very, very sharp line on this.
She was completely unequivocal. Based on the action, she said, quote, "He wasn't captured. He was kidnapped."
And that shift in language isn't just semantics, is it?
No, it's everything. Kidnapping a constitutionally elected head of state, especially by disabling a country's infrastructure with overwhelming military force. It's profoundly against international law.
It goes against the core principle of national sovereignty.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And speaking of shifting narratives, we have to talk about that incredible claim Trump made about Vice President Delcy Rodriguez.
The constitutional successor to Maduro.
The very one. Trump claimed she was in back-channel talks with Senator Marco Rubio.
And had allegedly told him, "We'll do whatever you need."
This claim is, it's fascinating because the sources immediately analyze it as a deliberate psychological operation, a psyop.
The idea being to sow doubt and confusion.
Precisely. To make the military and the government officials still in Caracas think their leader is talking to the enemy. It's designed to undermine loyalty.
So it's not about proving it's true, it's about creating chaos.
Exactly. And according to the reports, Vice President Rodriguez has very clearly stated the complete opposite.
A message of resistance.
Yes, calling on the country to fight what she calls imperialist aggression. They are flatly refusing the narrative that their government is now, kaput. They're saying it's still standing.
This shift from so-called law enforcement to trying to create this internal collapse narrative, this is where the critique gets really serious.
It is.
And we have to look at the primary motivation that Trump himself just kept stressing: oil.
He was not shy about it.
No. He said the U.S. will be very strongly involved in the Venezuelan oil industry. And then he made sure to note that Venezuela has the world's largest reserves.
And this is the crux of it. The sources draw a really sharp contrast here. If this were truly just about criminal charges against one person,
then the constitutional order would just kick in. The vice president takes power, the state keeps functioning.
Right. Law enforcement would be complete. But that's not what Trump said.
Not at all. His statement implies that was never the real objective.
It confirms it. He said the U.S. is going to assign people to control the government and prioritize taking over the oil industry, claiming he'd finally make it work right.
Andrea Chavez argues this basically confirms the goal is regime change.
And resource control, using the narco-trafficking charges as like a thin legal veil to justify a military intervention.
And the moment the U.S. military acted, the global community did not wait to weigh in.
No, the condemnation was swift and it was widespread.
This wasn't just, routine diplomatic statements either.
We saw really powerful statements from major regional powers. Mexico's Ministry of Foreign Affairs called the attack a clear violation of Article 2 of the Charter of the United Nations.
And when a country like Mexico uses that specific language, it's a huge deal.
It is. They're calling the action illegitimate and illegal on the world stage, period.
Brazilian President Lula da Silva was just as sharp. He called it an unacceptable line.
Setting an extremely dangerous precedent. That's the key fear here, that any major power can now invade a smaller neighbor under some fabricated legal pretext.
And this concern wasn't just coming from foreign governments. There was immediate, fierce opposition inside the U.S.
Oh yeah, domestic political opposition. Congressman Greg Caesar, who chairs the Congressional Progressive Caucus, argued Trump has no right to take the U.S. to war. He called it reckless and illegal.
And Caesar specifically urged Congress to vote on a war powers resolution. Now, for anyone unfamiliar, what does that actually mean? What are the practical terms?
So that's a key piece of this. The war powers resolution basically says the president has to notify Congress within 38 hours of committing armed forces to action.
Okay.
And here's the crucial part. It forces the president to withdraw those forces within 60 to 90 days unless Congress has specifically authorized it or declared war.
So Caesar's demand is essentially Congress saying, you bypassed us to start a war, and we need to use our authority to stop it.
Exactly. It puts the entire operation's domestic legality directly into question.
Okay, before we get to the wider geopolitical fallout, we have to tackle one of the core claims Trump kept repeating.
The oil claim.
That Venezuela stole our oil and the U.S. is getting it back. This is used to justify the economic part of this, but the sources say it's just a fabrication.
It's a critical piece of misinformation.
Yeah.
And we have to rely on Professor Miguel Tinker Salas's historical analysis here to correct it.
Because the oil was never stolen.
Never. The main nationalization happened way, way back in 1976 under President Carlos Andrés Pérez, long before Chavez or Maduro were anywhere near power.
So when the Venezuelan government took control of those assets back then, what happened to the American and European companies?
They were fully compensated. The sources are really clear on this. Companies like ExxonMobil, Shell, they were paid.
And not just paid, but
Often much above and beyond what they had already extracted. I mean, ExxonMobil's subsidiary there was once Standard Oil's most profitable entity in the world. They made enormous profits, and then they were paid for the assets they left behind.
So this whole idea of getting back stolen property is baseless.
Completely baseless. The original owners were paid for those assets decades ago.
But what about Hugo Chavez's actions in the mid-2000s? That's what people often point to.
Right, but Chavez's moves in 2006, 2007, they were about closing a loophole in that original 1976 law. He simply required the state-owned oil company, PDVSA, to have majority control in all joint ventures, at least 51%.
It was a statement of sovereignty.
That's all it was.
Hmm.
And what did companies like ExxonMobil and ConocoPhillips do?
They chose not to respect it.
They abandoned their projects. They decided it was better to leave and sue in international arbitration than to operate under the new sovereign rules. To call their voluntary departure a theft of oil is, well, it's just historically false.
That record really highlights why the sources are so focused on the resource driver behind this. It makes you think of that very cynical quote from Juan Pablo Pérez Alfonso.
The old Venezuelan petroleum minister.
Yeah.
It's iconic and it's so relevant right now.
Oil is the excrement of the devil.
Exactly. It's a reminder that the resource itself often seems to curse the nations that have it, just driving these endless cycles of foreign interference and conflict.
So let's zoom out from the oil fields to the bigger picture. The sources are suggesting this operation goes way beyond Caracas.
Oh, it absolutely does. It's tied directly to the broader U.S. geopolitical strategy for the Western Hemisphere.
Juan Gonzalez zeroed in on the key quote from Trump's press conference.
He did, and it really encapsulates the whole agenda. The quote was, "American dominance in the Western Hemisphere will never be doubted again."
I mean, you can't get much clearer than that.
No, analysts are reading that as a forceful return to a New Monroe doctrine, a kind of big stick diplomacy.
And what's the message being sent to, say, other nations in the region who might not want to fall in line?
The message is the U.S. military and economic control is being reimposed. Full stop. and it's meant to exclude rivals like China and Russia.
So it's not just for Caracas.
No, it's for Mexico, Brazil, Cuba, Nicaragua. Every progressive government in the region is now, as the sources put it, in the crosshairs. Political non-alignment will not be tolerated.
And on that note of political manipulation, let's talk about the opposition figures. The sources highlight the just stunning sidelining of Maria Corina Machado,
The Nobel Peace Laureate.
who was, for a long time, the favored face of the U.S.-backed opposition.
And now, in the sharp assessment of Alejandro Velasco, she was thrown under the bus.
Because the U.S. administration indicated they'd work with the existing Chavista structure, people like Vice President Rodriguez, if they'd just play ball.
Which reveals the goal was never about promoting democracy or a specific leader like Machado.
So if the real goal is just oil control and stability, an inconvenient opposition figure is actually a liability.
Precisely. Machado was a useful symbol for international consumption. Once the U.S. decided on direct control, they just needed collaborators, whatever their political history.
Okay, turning back to the ground in Caracas, the sources detail active resistance. So if the goal was to decapitate the government, how successful was it, really?
Well, key figures are confirmed to be active and fighting back. The defense minister, Vladimir Pedrino Lopez, who commands the military, he confirmed sites were struck and immediately declared the army mobilized and ready to fight.
And Diosdado Cabello.
The powerful leader of the ruling party. He went right out into the streets asking people to trust their leaders and resist.
So the command structure is far from shattered.
It seems not. Their public, coordinated defiance suggests they're still very much in the fight.
And what are reporters like Andrea Chavez seeing from the population?
Active, popular resistance. People are protesting. They're demanding proof of life for Maduro and his wife.
They're refusing to accept some U.S.-appointed government.
Exactly. The key takeaway from the ground is that the population sees this as an illegal act of war and a kidnapping, not a legal arrest. The remaining government seems committed to a prolonged fight.
So what does this all mean?
It means we're left with this fundamental, irreconcilable tension. On one side, you have the U.S. framing this as a necessary legal law enforcement action.
And on the other?
You have the overwhelming international consensus, the local reporting, and all the historical context, which says this is an illegal military kidnapping driven by oil and a desire to reimpose regional dominance.
This whole thing just instantly draws historical parallels, doesn't it? Especially to one operation from 36 years ago that's cited in the sources.
Yes, Juan Gonzalez immediately connected it to the seizure of Manuel Noriega in Panama. It even happened around the same date, January 3rd.
But he emphasized a critical difference.
The huge difference. The Noriega operation was logistically much easier because the U.S. already had military bases right there in the Canal Zone.
So they had staging areas, supplies, command structures all in place.
Precisely. They had a ready-made footprint. Venezuela, on the other hand, is much larger, culturally different, and critically, the population is, quote, much more politically conscious and organized.
So this won't be a swift, clean resolution.
Gonzalez argues it's the beginning of a long, drawn-out struggle that will require a constant, costly U.S. military presence.
And that idea of a protracted struggle is something the historian Alejandro Velasco also highlighted when he was raising these critical questions about what happens next.
Yeah, the near-term consequences, they seem to hinge on two things. First, how will the remaining Venezuelan government, Pedrino Lopez, Cabello, Rodriguez, how will they respond to sustained pressure?
Will they keep fighting, or will something force a collapse?
And second, and maybe this is the most significant part for the operation's legitimacy, what will the U.S. Congress do about the War Powers Resolution, about this explicitly anti-constitutional military operation?
Congress holds the legal key, the purse strings.
They do. They can authorize it or they can shut it down.
And that dynamic, this willingness to ignore both international and domestic legal standards, that really seems to be the key takeaway here.
It is.
I mean, considering the U.S. has shown it's willing to ignore its own legal standards, like pardoning a convicted narco-trafficker like the former Honduran president just weeks before this, the question for every Latin American nation has to be,
How do we respond?
how do you respond to a new era of military coercion that's masked as law enforcement? If the rules no longer apply, how do any of these nations protect their sovereignty? We appreciate you trusting us with your source material for this deep dive. We'll see you next time.